Wow, good afternoon, everybody. How are we? That was really rubbish. Good afternoon, everybody. How are we? Yeah, we're right. We have received about 54 complaints that there hasn't been enough touchy-feely activity in the conference so far. So I'm giving you a 20-second warning that you're about to do some. There will be no physical holding of hands unless you wish to do so. Your warning is down to about 10 seconds, and at the end of this 10 seconds, I'll be inviting everybody to come and join me in this beautiful big space we have created in the room. And I have a tiny little job for you. It's about 2 seconds left now on the warning, and yep, that's it, it's up. So now's your time to get up and come in here. It'll be gentle, don't worry. That's including the people at the back of the room. Just find a space. You can do a helicopter space if you want. You can give me a hug if you like, that's okay. I should say, for those of you who don't know, my name's Keith Greaves. I'm going to be kind of hosting this afternoon, a little bit of facilitating like this, and a bit of hosting. Hopefully it'll be, collectively, it'll be quite an entertaining afternoon. I have bunches of helpers that are going to help me through this afternoon. But to get us going, shortly you're going to hear from 8 core values winners. Fantastic. You saw it all last night. They have worked really hard to get together some inside stories for you. They're going to share them with you through a process called Pecha. For anybody that's used Pecha as a presenter, it's mildly terrifying because it's like being on a roller coaster. For the participants, it's great because it's really short and pithy. They get 400 seconds to communicate some interesting things to you, so it's quite pacey. There will be 8 of them. They'll go back to back. So to start us off, a bit of a stretch and activity and reconnect. I'm going to ask you to use this lovely big space we've created. And we're going to do a little bit of sociometry. First one I've got for you. Where's home? Because we have traveled from all over the place. So let's see if we do this. My geography is terrible, but I'm going to pretend I'm right here in the southern side of Adelaide, and I'm south. Okay? So if I'm home for me is Adelaide, I'm going to find a space somewhere close to here. If home is somewhere north, and it might be, you'll figure this out as a group, I'm sure. North might be, I don't know, maybe in the middle of Australia, maybe it's Darwin, maybe it's beyond Darwin, maybe it's another Indonesia, you know. So you get the idea. North is going to be up here, and we'll have east over here, and we'll have central Australia here somewhere, and we'll have west over there, and you'll figure it out, and the geography will be all over the place. And Tasmania, yeah, you can go really south. There's a bit more room behind the chairs. So when you get there, find a couple of people you haven't met yet, have a little chat, and tell them what you love about where you live. Okay, so let's test our geography. Off we go. Lovely jubbly. And winding our chats down and taking a breath. Nice to think of home for a minute. That's it, I'm not going to be able to stop him now. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody. Let's pause for a moment. So we have an extraordinary eastern, southeastern kind of contingent. I'm kind of keen to get the extremities. Who's over by the wall? Can I get how far east have we gone? Somebody shout out, please. New Zealand. Okay, good. All the way from New Zealand. What about south? Who's the furthest south? Hobart, good job. Okay, we got heaps from Adelaide. Where are we all from? Here's a massive cluster here. Is that Victoria? Canberra, New South Wales. Okay, Victoria. Yeah, very good geography going on here. We have a contingent up north, closer to our northern neighbours, even beyond Australia. From Darwin, Indonesia, Singapore. Fantastic. We're out west. UK. Okay, where else? All UK? Perth. Okay, all right, good job. All right, that was pretty easy. Let's do one more. Oh, so you want more? Oh, so I beg your pardon. Come on, where are you from? I know where you're from.
Yeah, I just want to wave to that lot. There seem to be a lot of us over here.
There is an awful lot of you over here. Where else? Does anybody else want to shout out? Queensland. Nice. Okay, good. All righty. Let's do it again. Some of you in the room have an orange bit of paper or a blue bit of paper. I need you to find a bit of space, a bit of helicopter space, And we're going to try and see if we can do that once more. We'll have another go at this. Your main crew, or where do you do most of your work? Now, I'm sure for some of you, you'll say every single category. There are a bunch of categories. Go find the one that you think best fits you. Have a chat about how engagement fits within your work and how confident you feel about it. Alrighty, I'm going to keep this fairly pacey, so bear with us while we're changing ourselves around, sorting ourselves out at the front of the room. Our first team are ready to roll. I'm going to introduce them in a second, but I'll tell you how this will work. You have 400 seconds. For those of you not familiar with PechaKucha, the typical format is 20 slides for 20 seconds a slide. The presenters have to deal with an automated process. So when I hit go, their presentation's off. Right? It's out of their control. And they have been rehearsing and drafting scripts, and it kind of puts a bit of pressure on you if you're presenting. So they've done a great job in doing it and getting it ready, and our first bat in was this group here. And we've all won awards last night, so well done. And the first group we're going to hear from, if you have one of these, this is profiled on page 24. I'm going to have Anna and Holly. Each presenter will briefly introduce themselves, and when they're ready, I hit the go button, and then we go. 400 seconds. Take some notes for yourself if you like. I'm not going to do a Q&A at the end of this because we go straight to afternoon tea. So if there's a particular question you want to ask somebody, note who it is, get your question. You'll have a half an hour over afternoon tea to get them in. Good enough? Very good. Make yourselves comfy. Kick your shoes off if you like. You'll be here a while. Okay, you ready? Yeah, okay. So, Anna, Holly, could you please briefly introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Anna Peterson. I'm Senior Manager of Communications and Engagement in Urban Growth, looking after our CBD portfolio. And my colleague, Holly Langler, is Communications and Engagement Program Manager for the Bays Precinct.
Okay, you ready?
We're ready.
All righty. Let's hear about your not just one award, 2 awards that you won last night. So, you're off.
In July 2014, the New South Wales Premier Mike Baird announced that Urban Growth New South Wales would lead the development of the government's last significant waterfront land in Sydney's Inner Harbour, the Bays Precinct. It's 95 hectares of land and 94 hectares of waterways, just 2 kilometres from the Sydney CBD. The land stretches from Balmain to Pyrmont, and it includes the iconic Sydney Fish Market and the heritage-listed White Bay Power Station. It has a deep water port, a cruise terminal, a park, a greyhound racing track, lots of big and small boats and water sport activities. The ambition for the Bays Precinct is bold. It's to drive an internationally competitive economy through 8 great destinations on Sydney Harbour that will transform not only Sydney and New South Wales, but the whole of Australia over the next 20 to 30 years. And the vision includes a new market, a tech hub, potentially an innovation district, more housing, improved maritime facilities and recreation spaces. It includes 5.5 kilometres of waterfront promenade that will allow people to walk from Woolloomooloo to Balmain for the first time. The precinct land is owned by 5 government agencies and some private landholders, and it sits across 2 local government areas and intersects with other large projects, including the WestConnex motorway. It hosts maritime industries and major harbour events like New Year's Eve and the Vivid Festival. It's also next to some of the most dense residential inner suburbs in Sydney and some of the most politically active communities, home to highly educated and connected people who've been speaking on behalf of the Bays for 15 years. So when we started the project, we asked a random sample of people what they thought about the Bays Precinct. And the majority view was that they liked the concept and they just wanted us to get on with it. After 15 years of talking about the Bays, of consultative committees, workshops and master plans, people were ready to get going. So what did we do?
Well, we called for fresh thinking, new ideas. We brought in urban renewal experts from around the globe and across Australia. We held an international summit with 350 people that generated 20 high-level strategic principles. We had great food. Then what did we do? We held a giant open day, had dog shows, seafood cooking demonstrations, former boat workers talking about their love of restoration. Around 25,000 people discovered the bays, including areas closed off for decades. Free food again, this time ice creams. We listened, and again they said they wanted us to get started. So then what? We kept talking and listening and eating. We held another summit. This one was open to anyone, a Sydney-siders summit. People heard short talks, shared videos, wrote post-its, talked at listening tables, scrawled ideas on butcher's paper. We held forums with school kids who told us our presentations were boring, with industry who came in droves, and with local community and council reps who took the stage and gave us a presentation. They told us they had a scorecard and were marking us. They sang, "I'll be watching you." Free food again, tacos and muffins. We collected 2,700 post-its, 82 metres of butcher's paper and hours of video. People told us they liked our ideas, that they were no-brainers. We were glad they liked our ideas because they were really their ideas. It was what they had been talking about for the last 15 years. They said we should get on with it. So what did we do? We kept talking and listening and talking. We couldn't stop by this point. We asked for even more ideas, great ideas. We met with anyone who was interested, business, community, universities, local residents, school kids who had some of the most amazing ideas. We drank tea and we ate some average biscuits. Then we hit August 2015, and after 1 year of talking, we stopped for a week. And then we started again, but this time behind closed doors, as we analysed the mountains of data that we'd collected. We engaged consultants to help with the thousands of pieces of feedback. We worked with our project team every day. We also worked with an industry panel of who's who to go through the great ideas, chaired by Sir Bob Parker, former Mayor of Christchurch. We were publicly criticised for stopping talking, so then we invited the critics in and we formed a community advisory panel to help us analyse. They liked that. We documented everything. We wrote report after report. We made giant spreadsheets. We produced a consultation report and a transformation plan, which is a blueprint for the next 25 years. We then made another report that said how the consultation report and the great ideas informed the plan. We launched the transformation plan with government partners, industry leaders, our community advisory panel and university students. We said we'd be getting on with it, but not with all of it, just half of it. The rest was going to come later. But no one complained about that. They were all talked out and so relieved that finally we were going to start doing something.
So what was all this about, all this talking and listening and eating? About a project that had lots of thinking already and well thought out plans and recommendation. This was about getting a project off the ground that hasn't been able to get going for 15 years. A project with a 25-year time frame that will keep changing over this time. It was about getting buy-in from a broad range of people in a very short space of time as a relative newcomer to the project, and it was about including those people who wouldn't have been previously involved, who don't currently live or work in the area, but they might do in the future. We now have a strongly supported project, but we're still trying to get on with it because our work takes time. And our challenge is to keep up the talking and the listening and the eating as we move from visioning to the more difficult funding and building stages over the many, many years to come.
Anna and Holly, brilliant, well done. Well-deserved double award winners in planning and Australasian Project of the Year. So congratulations. Give them one more little clap, please. And thanks for starting us off. I'm going to tee up our second presentation. You get about a minute to talk to your neighbours and reflect on some of the things you just heard there. So talk to each other for a moment. Thanks, everybody. Our next winners are in the infrastructure category. And I'm going to let the guys introduce themselves, but for those of you that are following at page 38 of this compendium, page 38 of the compendium, there's a profile of the project Delighted. Now, Alan, I've only got your name up there and I haven't got your colleague's name up there.
That's all right.
So you can introduce yourselves.
Yep.
3 a.m. in the morning this came through.
3:08.
So they've been up rehearsing half the night or something. I don't know. Wish them luck. Are you ready? You can just introduce yourselves and then I'll hit go.
No, that's fine. I'm Alan Rodwell. I was Community Relations Manager for the Hamwood Modernisation Project from GHD. This is Ian Hardy. He was Community Relations Coordinator for the project from Murrumbidgee Irrigation. Before we start, we have a really long name, Murrumbidgee Irrigation Area Renewal Alliance. I'm just going to say Alliance, so I fit in 20 seconds a slide. So if you hear that, that's what we're talking about. So yeah, we're ready to... So yeah, the Hamwood Modernisation Project, this is a project that started in 2011 and was completed in 2015. So for those of you who don't know where Hamwood is, which would be a lot of people, you may be more familiar with Griffith, which is in Western New South Wales, which is the centre of the Murrumbidgee Irrigation Area. So as you can see, the Murray-Darling Basin in the green up there, Griffith's, the Murrumbidgee Irrigation Area is that little red area, which is actually about 660,000 hectares. So it's not really that little when you look at things. When people think of Griffith and Hamwood, they think of oranges, they think of wine, they think of good Italian food. It is the food bowl of Australia, and one of the things that was really important for this project was that we're dealing with people's livelihoods and these people who rely on the land and rely on water to I guess, feed their families and feed Australia, really. So water is life out there, and that's basically what we were doing with this project. We were trying to save water by implementing new and more efficient infrastructure. The context in which we were trying to save this water, as you will see, was quite difficult at the time. It happened to be when the MDBA Basin Plan was around. So we're coming in trying to save water and help people. From the outsider, it actually looked as though we were trying to take people's water, which, as you can see from the burning of plans there in Griffith, it made our job a little bit hard. So what Murrumbidgee Irrigation did is they actually engaged an alliance of John Holland UGL and GHD to help them out in terms of doing stakeholder engagement, which Murrumbidgee Irrigation hadn't really had any rigour around in the past. So one of the main things that we needed to do when we got in there was build some trust with the farmers, with the community. Trust was needed as things had gotten off to a not so great start, and people were being told, this is the system you're getting, we'll deliver water to you like this, so you change everything on farm to meet what we need. When produce prices are down, electricity's high, that doesn't necessarily match up with people's expectations. So what we had to do was manage people's expectations and get a balance between what was going to achieve water savings and at the same time was going to meet the needs of the farmers in the community and their livelihoods. We undertook quite a rigorous process of having a project reference group, which was democratically elected by 250 farmers. It was actually a greater voter turnout than the actual board elections. So we had preferential voting, it was adjudicators, it was stricter than the election, federal election. We got a core group of farmers and we were doing a two-tier engagement program where we would engage with the gentlemen up on the screen who were democratically elected, as well as the wider project base themselves. We communicated with people how they wanted to be communicated with, phone, fax, if you still believe it, and lots of face-to-face work. After the end of a 12-month engagement period, we ended up with something like this, which had a lot of pipes and a lot of channels and a lot of automation. And we ended up with 94% of people agreed with the scheme, which, considering at the beginning no one really agreed with anything, was quite momentous. As you can see from this little quote up here, we had people trying to say that they didn't like the organisation in the beginning, to saying that it's great compared to what they've experienced in other projects. So that's what we had when we first did this first stage of the project, and I'll throw over to Ian to talk about what happened next.
Thanks, Alan. The model that was put forward was came to all of a sudden a stop. The company had a change of CEO, and just did not agree with what was happening. And so we had a 1-year break, and then all of a sudden that CEO left and we moved on with a new CEO who said, we've got to make this happen. And although we'd had the break, the trust had been built by the work that had been done by the engagement team with that community. And so we, in a very short period of time, kicked off constructing and building and modifying this irrigation scheme. We had 2 years to build it in, and the irrigation scheme basically runs for 10 months of the year. You have two months, or roughly 8 weeks, to actually shut the system down to actually undertake routine maintenance. Yet we had 2 years of work to complete. And so that meant working with those customers to shut the system down when they were right in the middle of their irrigation season. And so you can see the jobs like that. We had opportunities to shut the system literally down for 3 days. If you think in the middle of summer, you've got 40 degree days for 3, 4, 5 days at a time, and people are growing their wine grapes, their citrus, and trying to maintain their productivity, and we're coming in and saying, hey, look, we need to shut this down. And so a lot of work, individual, a group of us working with those customers, building up that confidence that, yes, we can shut this down, we'll get it going in 3 days' time, and it worked out really well. Our business, skills that were transferred over to Murrumbidgee Irrigation from that project. We've now got an engagement team, we've got a group of people who are staffed and skilled. That whole group of people up on the screen there, every one of those people was an engagement person. Every one of them touched a customer. And so you had construction people, you had truck drivers, you had so many people just interacting with that group of people. And the success was built on that original engagement, that building that trust with that community. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. A well-deserved award for infrastructure. You can build to this imminent sense of relief on this end of the room now by coming and relaxing. Everybody else, you get another minute. It's a very generous afternoon. You get another minute to talk to each other. We'll line up our third presentation. Okay, thank you, everybody, for your patience with us while we juggle all our sessions. Now, this is on page 34 of your little compendium. I won't say who, but you know who you are. I lovingly heard this referred to last night as the Woof Woof Meow Meow project, as in the room at the Core Values Award last night. But winners of the Environment Award, would you like to introduce yourselves, please, before we launch you into it?
I'm Andrew Lamb. I'm with the Dog and Cat Management Board. It's a statutory authority, and I report to an independent board of experts.
I'm Emma Lawson. I'm from Democracy Co. And bear with us, we haven't had any time to practice at all. Yeah.
We're both a bit tall. The received wisdom in dogs and particularly cats in South Australia is it's incredibly controversial, and politically, for many, many years, governments have been reluctant to go anywhere near the issue. So my board has been putting forward proposals to government for 20 years, and they really haven't gone any further because politicians right to the very highest level have thought, no, we'll lose political capital. There are people out there with very passionate views. And the stakeholders in this area often pretty organised, sophisticated organisations that have media units and are used to participating in public debate. So we've got organisations like the Local Government Association, the Vets Association, breeder groups. We have the RSPCA and the Animal Welfare League, who are strong advocates in their own way, Pet Industry Association, and to the other end of the level of sophistication, we're working sheepdog organisations and a range of other smaller groups, all with really strong views, passionately held. They often have distrustful relationships of each other, sometimes toxic, poisonous relationships with each other. And as I said, the received view is that because there are such strong, controversial, incontrovertible views, they can never be reconciled. Let's not do anything. What the board did was burrow down a lot deeper to engage carefully with all of those stakeholders, and what we found was that there was actually a really high degree of consensus on 70 or 80% of the issues. So we worked really closely with them to come up with a range of proposals, but there were still some issues that there was dissent or disagreement on, such as mandatory desexing of all dogs and cats. Our minister, who supported what we were doing, was getting some pushback at political level, and he suggested that we engage in a citizens' jury. So I might hand over to Emma, who we then engaged to facilitate that, to talk about what happened next.
So what we did is we spent a bit of time, quite a bit of time, working with the department and at a political level to define the remit for a citizens' jury. And what we came up with was last year in South Australia, over 10,000 dogs and cats were put down. The state government recently announced some reforms to dog and cat laws. What further measures can we introduce or trial to reduce the number of unwanted pets? And then we did something a little unusual, and we set a really defined authority. So it was an open question for discussion, but then the authority had a very specific question, which was the Minister and Cabinet gave the jury the power to come to a verdict on the issue of mandatory desexing. So they were interested in one hand on all the ideas, but then also on a verdict on the issue of mandatory desexing, something that we hadn't sort of seen before, but we thought, let's try it in this jury. And it worked really well. Then we recruited, New Democracy recruited for us actually, 35 jurors that were randomly selected from across the state. And 50-50, we went 50-50 pet ownership, non-pet ownership, so that we knew we had a cross-section in the room. We didn't want everybody in the room with a close stake in the game. We wanted to have a mix. And that was done through Australia Post. What was, I guess, most, and I have to say, it was really, they met for 3.5 days. It wasn't very long, and it was hugely successful. 100% of jurors said they'd do it again. 100% said they'd recommend it to others. 100% enjoyed it a lot, and they came up with 7 high-level recommendations. They had 100% support for 3 recommendations and 85% plus support for the remainder. We had a lot of media support and coverage, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. And it also resulted, and the outcome was that the minister got recommendations which were able to be put into legislation, including the verdict on mandatory desexing, which is, if you're interested, is yes, we should go for it. And there was 100% support from the jurors for compulsory and mandatory desexing, and we could talk about the details, but you're not interested in the details of exactly what they said, but it was 100% support for that recommendation. And that a large number of their recommendations have now gone through Parliament, and the reform is in progress. And I guess it's, if I was to say there's one or two takeaways from this, the first one is the importance of stakeholder engagement in this process to getting enduring policy outcomes. And that overall is why we've had the success in this. Those reforms sort of easily pass through Parliament compared with most reforms, I would say, and now are well established and are on their way. And that was as a consequence of all the work that the department did in the lead up with stakeholders, but then the way we also involved the stakeholders in the citizens' jury process. So we actually integrated those stakeholders in that process. We established what we called a core reference group, probably more appropriately called a stakeholder reference group actually, which was made up of all the stakeholders that Andrew talked about. And they were involved in the design of the process and also in helping us develop a witness list for the jurors. Now, the jurors were able to choose from that witness list or any witness they wanted, really, but it was just a way of bringing those stakeholders in and getting them highly involved in the process. And then the stakeholders went through us, they came along with meetings, and then they came out the other side and worked closely with Andrew and his team on exploring the recommendations from the jury. I guess I can't state highly enough how important that was in terms of the success of this work. Other thing that was really important was the right remit and question. We nailed the problem, but we also had the open question, but we also had a very focused question for them, and that created a real intensity around their work, but also very clear outcomes for the government. Also important was the decision was not made by government, and it was... Anyway, I think we're finished.
I was giving you, if you can finish the sentence, go on.
I don't even know where I was
You
now.
can't leave us hanging. Who was it made by?
It was a decision made by people who were interested in having a say in the community in which they lived in. They really appreciated the jurors, the opportunity, and that gave the whole process status, and all the core stakeholders really acknowledged the process, the viability of the process, and stood by it. And so there were organisations like the Vets Association who were wary but stood by it at the end.
Very good. Emma, Andrew, big clap, please. Congratulations. Our fourth speaker unfortunately couldn't be here, but I kind of felt we should reference her because she did make the effort to come all the way over last night, and their project is on page 40 of the manual, and this is in disaster and emergency services. So I did speak to Virginia last night when she was here, and I just said I promised that I'd kind of give her apologies. So there she is on the left getting her award last night. She had to rush back to deal with this stuff because even though they've just won this award, they're right in the middle of their next disaster. So after the fires along the Otways coast, and they've got a lack of vegetation, there's landslides happening everywhere in Great Ocean Road, so they're right in the thick of it right now, which is unfortunate for us, but obviously she has work to do. Her project, I wanted to highlight it to you, is a great thing called the Fire Game. So it's well worth having a look this up, where they produced a fabulous board game that they used with their communities to literally use gamification and play around preparing for disaster management. So it's a very interesting process they went through, and a well-deserved winner. So that's our fourth one done. Okay, that was a quick one. Hence Kim's here beside me. So I have a bit of a vested interest in this. This is us last night. I am trying to steal the awards. I was involved in this project, so I've had the pleasure of goading Kimbra to do our presentation. And I said, oh, you have to do it. So I've been really strict. If you guys think I've been strict on you, I've been super strict on Kim. So Kim, I'm going to give you the same courtesy. You get to introduce yourself. And then when you're ready, I'm going to start you off. This is our project on health, and it is on page 36 of the compendium.
So I'm Kimbra White from Mosaic Lab, and of course that is where Keith is from as well. And the third member of our group is Nicole Hunter, who was here last night but is not able to be here today. On this particular project, we also had Chad Folks working with us, who some of you heard him talk about some other jury work this morning, and I'm doing this on behalf of Vic Health. Okay. 2/3 of Australians are overweight or obese. That includes me. It's been estimated by Vic Health that since 2005, the cost of obesity in Australia has been $50 billion per year, an amount that is truly hard to comprehend. Vic Health believes that there is a substantive body of research and evidence about what needs to be done, but they felt there was no will to act by industry or government, and the only way forward was to substantially involve the community in becoming a key voice, and commissioned the New Democracy Foundation to set up a citizens' jury of 100 people, and Mosaic's lab role was to design and facilitate that jury process. The remit, as you can see, was how can we make it easier to eat better? What made this jury different was that the jurors deliberated for 6 weeks online and only came together in person for 2 days over one weekend. So it was a serious attempt to integrate online and in-person deliberation. The online was quite successful in discussing the information. They had to read 64 submissions, identifying and voting on their information gaps and speakers, and they drafted their first 120 initial recommendations or asks. What didn't work so well online was the platform was not perfect. It was none of the Australian suppliers who might be in this room. And we as facilitators over-planned and over-facilitated them in that online space. We had them working in houses, streets and villages. We found that we had a lot of people who weren't active initially, and so our way around this was, some of them were just reading those 64 submissions and didn't have time to post. We put in a webinar process to try and encourage the online work, and in subsequent juries we now add a meet and greet at the beginning of any online work to overcome that. Once we got in the room, it's a dialogue process, the discussions were great, and there was a lot of respect for overweight people in the room. In setting their agreements, they had decided there would be no fat shaming, and there were people on the jury of every physical shape and size created simply by the randomness of the process. We had 120 recommendations at the beginning of day one, and so we set up a data wall. And as we went through the sorting and prioritisation of recommendations, the jurors could see what was happening in front of them as it happened. We typically use ideas rating sheets on the love it to loathe it scale that Nicole developed for understanding the level of support for all of the recommendations. And we always get to a point in the jury where we have to start talking to jurors about letting go of the recommendations that aren't getting support in the room. You might be interested to know that one of those was that all meat should be banned in Victoria and all Victorians should become vegetarians. We get our jury members to write their own reports. We use Google Docs so the group can write the report in one go, one 20 or 30-minute block. It's very exciting. We would have had about 20 writing groups set up, each working on one part of the report. And we always do a final walkthrough where we negotiate the final text and words with the whole group in plenary, negotiating any changes, and having a vote of whether you can live with it, a standing vote. You can see the bloke deciding, will I stand or will I sit, as to see whether recommendations will get into the report. And here we have this very final, wonderful presentation where the jury gets to pass its report over to the decision makers, in this case, Vic Health. Always a wonderful point when we get here. We were going to call this tricky bits or learnings or moments, so it's a mixture of a few things that happened, so as well as the online learning that we learned a lot about. Obesity. This was a really difficult issue to work with in that it personally affects all of us. We all know someone, whether it's ourselves or someone else, that struggles with weight. And there is poor food everywhere around us. We thought this was a topic that people might have found hard to talk about. It turned out that we had a group that was really prepared to withhold judgment and learn from everyone's experiences. Jurors usually get to hear from a set of speakers that they have chosen, and we commonly use panels and speed dialogue. With speed dialogue, we place jurors in groups of 10, and then all the presenters rotate around the groups. We find it a great process for both sharing information but also building respect between the jurors and the experts. We had a key moment in the jury that occurred in this speed dialogue. An industry expert felt she'd been verbally attacked and was extremely upset. We think a juror had said to her, how could she sleep at night when sugar in soft drinks is killing people? We closed the room, we shared the problem with the jury, and we asked the jury what they wanted to do, and this led to the jury making the appropriate apology in line with their agreements. One of the real difficulties of this particular jury was there was no direct line of influence to a decision maker who could do something. No one organisation is responsible for solving obesity. So Vic Health set up a steering group covering all of those big interest groups. Some work is being done in Vic Health right now. They're auditing the recommendations. It's a year out from that jury so that they can report back to the jurors on what happened. Overall, our experience is that juries will develop bold but not crazy recommendations. The work is deeply satisfying for the jurors. Jurors know how to step up and really do this type of work. And we're always blown away in these final presentations and final circles about the experience. It's remarkable work, and we just feel really privileged to be able to do it. If you want more information about this project, it's obviously in the book, it's on our website, it's on the New Democracy Foundation website. There are major reports and videos on the Vic Health website. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Mia, and this is Adama. And we'd also just like to give a shout out to our fearless team leader and personal paparazzi, Merrin, who's sitting over there. We are from Cumberland Council and we work in the community development team. And today we're going to be talking about a project we're involved with called Refugee Camp in My Neighbourhood.
So congratulations on your Community Development Award. Let's hear about it.
Thank you. So Refugee Camp in My Neighbourhood, the aim of this project is to share the reality of the journey that people go on when they are coming to a different place, seeking refuge, seeking asylum, going on a journey from their homeland to a different place, which for us it was Australia, and to show, I guess, the reality of that journey. This particular project provides a platform for our community to share their own experiences and their own stories on their own terms. In the Australian context, as we're quite familiar, the story about people seeking asylum and refugees is often told by a few powerful players like politicians and the media. And for us, this project has really been about shifting power from those people back to people who are directly affected so that they can speak from their own lived experiences. And for us as council, it was about providing a safe space for them to do this and to have a say on decisions which affect their lives. For us, ultimately, this project is about the fulfilment of human rights. And in our LGA, we actually have the highest number of refugees and asylum seekers of any LGA in New South Wales. So they're a really significant population. Many people have experienced a lot of rights violations on their way coming to Australia and continue to experience many barriers to accessing and experiencing their basic rights like work, health, being with their family, education on a daily basis in our community. So they're a really important group for us to focus on. For us, as council, we really believe that participation is the path to human rights being fulfilled. And so this project came about by our community saying we want to tell our stories. And we worked with them to come up with a concept, which is a simulation refugee camp, where they take people through the journey of being a refugee. It's led by tour guides who are members of our local community who are employed, and they share a bit about their own stories, their own experiences, and build a personal connection with an audience who is from all around Sydney who come in to hear these stories. And this program, I guess, the project involves telling facts as well as stories to get the message across.
So how was our community involved? As Mia said, we did an open call out to our community. So these are just, residents to service providers to organisations that are there to support the community. And we held meetings. We had meetings in the evening, on the weekend, during the daytime. And together we developed the framework for the project. So we used techniques such as storyboarding, which addressed the literacy and English proficiency issues. And, the group, which had about 100 community members participated in this process, were able to come up with what's the aim of this project? What are we trying to achieve? What are we going to evaluate and how are we going to evaluate it? What is the design of this tour going to look like? When we held the first consultation, we had half the room had arrived to Australia via refugee camp, another half had come to Australia via boat. Two very different journeys, two very different circumstances they were living in. Many didn't have their rights, didn't have visas to stay. So how could we reflect those two different pathways to Australia in one journey? That was something that we designed together as a group. I guess one of the key learnings from this was ensuring there was a safe way for our community to participate in the project, where they could share their stories from an empowering perspective and not necessarily be judged by people who are coming on a tour. I guess this is the third year that we've done this project, and each year it changes. And the reason it changes is because we adapt it to who's participating in this. We go through extensive consultation and design in collaboration with our community to say, okay, so what is the physical design going to look like? Is it still relevant? Are the key messages still relevant to what your community is experiencing, what you're experiencing? The tour guides we recruit, some have been with us from the beginning and others have joined and left after 1 year. What their stories is what they're sharing. So every tour is going to be very different. And the framework allowed for that to happen because not everybody's journey is the same. I guess the impact that we've had for those, people who come along on the tour are students, they're professionals, they're people who are interested in knowing more. And the biggest feedback we've had is people are gaining a lot of insights. They thought they knew about it. We've got experts in international law and human rights, and they walk out saying, I actually didn't realise I didn't know what I thought I knew. For us, the biggest impact is our community. So the people who participated in this in the process to actually develop and design the tour guides. For many, hadn't been in Australia for very long. There were so many barriers to employment. This is their first job. That job allowed them to get other jobs, longer-term jobs. But the biggest impact, I guess, is for many, that search for safety and travelling to Australia, they've lost their identity in so many ways. And for people to come along on a tour, to hear about them, about their personal story, who they are, was empowering in so many ways. So that sense of self is one of the biggest outcomes we felt we've been able to facilitate that process. In terms of the benefits, for us, as an opportunity for a council to really engage at that deeper level with our community, particularly a community that, particularly asylum seekers who don't necessarily feel that this is their community. They're here temporarily, they don't know what's going to happen next in their life. So it really gave us an opportunity to build those relationships. It allowed us to incorporate them into our planning processes. So at the moment, as a newly merged council, we're developing our community strategic plan. We had, for the first time at least, I think it was over 25 people who are bridging visas come to that consultation. Their challenges, their experiences are being heard and will be incorporated into our community strategic plan. If we didn't have those relationships, how would we be able to include that in that process? So for us as a council, it's quite important. Internally, it's allowed us to understand and also educate our colleagues about how to work with this particular cohort in our community. We formed partnerships with the New South Wales Refugee Health Service, who engage in the health sector and created health professional development tours for health professionals. And they've seen the value in stepping into somebody else's shoes and understanding their journey from a different perspective. So thank you, and thank you for listening.
Let me click up this side. So Martin, welcome.
Thank
Congratulations. Martin, you have won an award, the Indigenous winner. So well done. Good job.
Two?
You did do 2 awards, didn't you? What was the second one? I can't keep track of all these awards. No, it doesn't matter. I just got 2. Okay, nice. Martin, please introduce yourself and then we'll get you going.
Yep. I am Martin Plum. I'm the Director of Stakeholder Engagement and Coordination with the Department of Housing and Community Development, I think we are now. I've just changed. We've had an election, so department names have all changed. I'd like to tell you that I went home after the dinner and practiced this, but the reality is that I didn't. I think I was seen using my room swipe card to get into the elevator. So I'd had a couple. Anyway, so I'm here to give my presentation. I'm not well. Right, we're starting? Another world. So the Northern Territory offers up many challenges, particularly working in the remote communities that our Indigenous people live in. The NT has less than 250,000 people, 1.42 million square kilometres. It's bigger than France and Spain combined. About a third of the Northern Territory population is Aboriginal, so larger than anywhere else in Australia. They predominantly live in about 70 communities and hundreds of smaller outstations. They can be cut off for months at a time, and amongst the other challenges are the life expectancies and low employment, high rates of incarceration. In trying to work with Aboriginal Territorians to overcome these challenges, all spheres of government have repeatedly sought to consult people in remote communities, and usually well-meaning attempts over many years and decades have largely failed. Governments have had little appreciation of the complexities of the massive cultural divide between our two worldviews. Aboriginal culture, which is tens of thousands of years old, remains incredibly strong in our remote communities and dictates every facet of life for the residents who live there. The Northern Territory is one of the most linguistically diverse areas of the world, 87 languages and hundreds of dialects. In many instances, English is a second, third or even fourth language. The levels of English literacy and numeracy are low, and interpreting and translation services are not always readily available. Engaging with people in this environment to ensure that governments can plan and deliver appropriate services is therefore unique and complex and requires special skills and flexibility and a sense of humour. It also calls for consistent, coordinated approach something that's been sadly lacking, especially in recent times. Our project, the Remote Engagement and Coordination Strategy, and there's copies out in the foyer, focused on addressing and influencing change in the skills, knowledge and behaviour of Northern Territory public servants, and more broadly those whose jobs require them to interact with people living in remote communities. This was a bottom-up project. We're a very small team of 3 or 4 experienced practitioners working in community development. There was nothing before us to build on, so we had to start from scratch. We started by identifying who our partners were to help us design and develop the strategy. So first off, our partners were IAP2 Australasia, Charles Darwin University, the Aboriginal and Interpreter Service, regional councils, and an interagency working group set up for the project. The group included frontline Northern Territory government agencies, such as Police, Education, Power and Water Corporation. The working group brought experience and knowledge, but the reality is that there were more reviewers than doers, and the bulk of the work was still carried out by the inner core of a handful of passionate practitioners, drawing on their knowledge and relationships. At first, our senior managers were indifferent, so we went outside to influence the inside. We found strategic champions across government. We used personal relationships to garner support from people of influence and sought the best, most experienced consultants we could find who shared our passion. So ultimately, we produced the Remote Engagement Strategy and Coordination Strategy, and it was endorsed by Cabinet late last year. Look, it's a nice glossy document, but so what? We knew implementing the elements of the strategy is the key to influencing the change in the behaviour that we need. So some of the critical elements we saw were the ongoing cultural competency training across the Northern Territory Government in partnership with IAP2. So we do a 2-day training workshop. We've put 100 of our staff through so far, and we've got another 6 or 8 planned for the rest of the year. We talk about questioning the purpose of engagement, identifying appropriate methods to suit, evaluating our performance to improve our current practices. We've developed Bush Ready. It's a website to offer advice, guidance and tips for staff interacting with people living in remote communities. It includes checklists and simple do's and don'ts on things such as dress codes or eye contact. So that's www.bushready.nt.gov.au. Although the sites and tools haven't been officially launched yet, we've received enthusiastic feedback from people living and working in remote communities, and we've also been advised that at least one other Northern Territory government agency has adopted the tools as part of their induction. So we're now pushing for implementation across the NT government, including the adoption of common language around engagement. We also continue to promote cross-cultural competency training in all regional centres. I think that's about it. Yep. Oh, what we've learned. See, I told you I wasn't well. No, not going there.
Rachel, you're going to introduce yourself. Congratulations on your award for research. This is profiled on page 21 of the compendium. Rachel's upping the ante and managing her own time within the 400 seconds. So good on you, Rachel. If you hear me talking to Rachel, it's agreed prompts that we've suggested.
Yeah, I have to walk off if he starts talking over me.
So, thanks. I'm Rachel Leverton from the Department of the Premier and Cabinet here in South Australia. And our research project is on Fund My Community. So Fund My Community is an online people's budgeting program. It has $1 million in competitive grant funding for community organisations to implement projects to improve the lives of disadvantaged South Australians. Community organisations submit project proposals of between $10,000 and $100,000 through an online tool. The community then use the tool to allocate funding through creating a plan. They allocate funding to the projects that they think will best address disadvantage. Fund My Community is different to other processes as it invites citizens to take part in allocating the full $1 million budget across the projects. And the funding allocation is wholly decided by the community. In South Australia, we have a commitment to involving people in decision-making through our Premier Jay Weatherill. Fund My Community was created to trial using people's budgeting, also known as participatory budgeting, but I really struggle with that, and what I'm going to shorten to PB, because of my 20 seconds per slide, to allocate grant funds. And while PB is used widely across the globe, having rapidly spread from its origins in Brazil 20 years ago, we struggled to find much research or data that analysed the quality of the funding outcome when decision-making is devolved to the community. Lots of jurisdictions are using PB, it just seems that not many are evaluating it, or at least publishing their evaluations. So Fund My Community provided a unique opportunity to prove or disprove the model, and hopefully to demonstrate the value of bringing people's voice into decision-making. So the project started in October 2014. As good engagement practitioners, we consulted with our stakeholders and the community right from the outset. We met one-on-one with stakeholders and we ran an online survey asking the public for their input. In total, nearly 700 people took part in this consultation. What we found was widespread scepticism about the community's ability to allocate funding. We were told that 1, the public didn't have the required knowledge to be involved. 2, that their decision-making would be biased by internal or external factors. And 3, that large organisations with big networks would dominate and scoop the funding. If I had to summarise what we heard during the consultation, it was that involving the community in this type of decision-making was a bad idea, and the status quo should be maintained. That is, decisions about grant funding should be left to the experts. Well, that really frustrated me, because I'm a policy officer, so I'm all about data and evidence. And it seemed to me like the opposition that we were hearing was based on assumptions. It was assumed that people didn't have knowledge. It was assumed that people would allow their biases to influence their decision-making. It was assumed that the process would, in essence, be a popularity contest, that big organisations with lots of supporters would dominate and that smaller organisations or marginalised groups or issues would not be supported by the broader community. As I mentioned, Fund My Community was a trial, so we committed to evaluating it. The evaluation looked at all aspects of the program, including user experience, processes, efficiency and outcome. However, the component that we won the IAP2 Core Value Award was for the question, can using PB deliver a funding outcome that is comparable with the government's traditional approach of the expert panel? Or more simply, can the community make a better decision than experts? And being good engagement practitioners, we know the importance of the feedback loop. So we committed to sharing our findings from the evaluation, warts and all. Our methodology was to directly compare the two approaches, PB and expert panel. For this, we set up a dummy expert panel and tasked it with allocating the funding using its standard methods. That sounds like an oxymoron, doesn't it? A dummy expert panel. What I mean is that the panel was used as a control or a comparison mechanism. It had no bearing on the outcome, and it was simply convened for the research purposes. So before I go into our findings, here's a quick overview of the two approaches. Over 2,000 people took part in Fund My Community. They used our online allocation tool to choose the projects and create a plan. On average, they spent half an hour taking part, equating to over 1,000 hours of deliberation by the community. The top 14 projects that the community selected were offered funding for a total of $970,000. In comparison, the expert panel met twice for a total of 8 hours, equating to 24 hours of deliberation. The panel consisted of 3 public servants, each of whom had significant experience and knowledge in the community sector. The panel chose 21 projects for a total of $866,000. Having reviewed the proposals, the panel decided not to allocate the full $1 million. Interestingly, the community and the panel chose 6 projects in common. So on to our findings. I'd summarise these as, despite predictions, the sky will not fall in if you use PB. Our evaluation concludes that involving the community can deliver an outcome that is comparable with the expert panel. And if we use the logic that an expert panel makes a good decision, by extension, Fund My Community indicates that the community can make a good, perhaps even better decision. Here's the data. We used a risk value matrix. In summary, we found that the community is prepared to invest in projects that received a higher risk rating than the panel. Risk value scores included size, ratio of grant to balance sheet, and whether the organisation had previously received funding. We also found that the community chose more high-value projects. Value scores reflected things like the number of people to benefit versus the grant size, or bang for your buck. Secondly, we compared the regional allocation of funding to levels of regional disadvantage. We found that the community allocated funding to where it's most needed. So we used correlation coefficient, or your R-score, to get a single figure that we could compare against each other. The community's R-score was 0.46, closer to 1 than the panel's at 0.38. We also used a grant amount and standard deviation. We found that the standard deviation of the community was lower to the average grant amount requested by organisations than the panels. So our conclusion, the community should be involved in decision making, including allocating public funds. Fund My Community disproves the assumption that the community's decision making will be influenced by bias or heuristics. It disproves the assumption that involving people in funding allocations will lead to a popularity contest. What it has demonstrated is that members of the public are deliberative. They weigh up the choices and they consider the options. But more than that, Fund My Community dispels the assumption that experts are uniquely placed to make good decisions. This project provided a unique opportunity to test the status quo, the expert panel model to funding allocation. And in my mind, left me questioning the merit of that approach. Based on this work, Fund My Community has been adopted as an annual program by the South Australian Government. So bookmark this page, ready for Fund My Community 2017.
So our final presentation, Claire will introduce herself in a moment. So two big awards. So Organisation of the Year and International Project of the Year. I'm delighted to get Claire to introduce herself, but Claire, you are now known in the room as Claire Woohoo. Okay, so if anybody saw her reactions to winning such great awards last night, you are now commonly and lovingly referred to as that. So Claire, over to you to introduce yourself and take us for our last presentation.
Okay, good afternoon everyone. My name is Claire Patterson and I'm the Manager of Community Relations for Landcorp. And my role is to guide the strategic direction and delivery of community relations for our organisation. Hit the go button. Okay, so first of all, I would like to acknowledge and show my respect to the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands that we gather upon here today. So Landcorp, we're the WA State Government's land and development agency, and we have a 25-year history in our current iteration of delivering projects and community outcomes across the state of Western Australia. At the moment, we have 140 active projects statewide, and we rely heavily on strong government, industry and community relationships, and we are importantly a catalyst for private sector investment. Delivering on the promise of public participation isn't an easy challenge, particularly with the number of projects we have across an area the half the size of Europe. So why are we on this journey of stakeholder engagement and improving it? In 2009, Landcorp delivered more than 130 projects across the state, and we'd released 1,000 residential and commercial lots to the market. But our successful delivery of projects really relied upon the close collaboration with stakeholders. So given the importance of this, we decided to survey our stakeholders, and this is what they said. Landcorp was described as difficult to work with, not good at keeping our word, and working to our own agenda. Our engagement approach was variously described as bullying, ham-fisted, arrogant, and lacking. While we believed we were partnering with our communities, people felt that they were being excluded and ignored. We thought we were agile. They were none of this. It sent us searching for a better way of actually engaging with our stakeholders and community. So driven from the top down, in 2009, our board said, enough is enough, we've got to overhaul our processes and procedures. So we started with our senior leadership team, and they were all assigned corporate stakeholder relationship management plans. And since then, we've had a really robust process internally with our leadership team to actually engage with our partners and with our stakeholders without it always being issues driven. We continue to research. 2010, we were starting to get a little bit better, but we really needed to do a cultural shift. And so to ensure that there was consistency and a good level of engagement, we worked to engage our staff and ensure that they understood the values and the benefits of supporting a proactive public participation process. We did emotional intelligence workshops. We overhauled our Aboriginal participation plan. We established a community or an issues management committee, and in 2013 I was employed as the manager of community relations. We were doing well with our corporate stakeholders. The community still needed to be lifted. So then we developed an awareness around the ideal of social risk. I work with development and project managers. So we really looked at the way that we could prioritise our projects depending on the kind of risk that might be inherent in a community or the style of development. 70 ops and business development staff went through internal training, and we also extended this to our marketing and communications team. There is now a significantly higher understanding of social risk, outrage management, and emotional intelligence. And we also recognise KPIs throughout everybody's performance review process. And in 2015, we built it into our business plan. And last year, we set the requirement that 100% of our projects must have a community engagement plan. So I'm just going to talk about a couple of case studies. You would have seen some photos of Karratha. So during the mining boom between 2010 and 2014, Karratha housing prices had a average weekly rent of $2,200, and the median house price was $955,000. Now, this was extreme for the community. The house prices were that height, but there was absolutely no infrastructure, no amenity within the city. So we worked with the Shire of Roebourne and 600 local residents, community groups, Aboriginal groups and businesses, and we came up with an absolutely great plan for changing Karratha. But some of the lessons we learnt was that we had some political questions over the money, that whether it was spent wisely. We delivered on better streetscapes, new infrastructure and the release of land, but really people were questioning, could we have done greater modelling of our economic scenarios? And so we started to do that, working a lot more closely with the community, getting their ownership in, and particularly with local government in the Pilbara to continue to deliver Pilbara cities in that way. Our next growing challenge for Landcorp is in urban density. Our role is to deliver on government policy, which includes significant social changes for the community of Western Australia. Now, when you speak to people in WA, and particularly in Perth, they'll say they support and understand why there is a need for density, but when we talk to them about it in their backyard, you know what they say: no, thank you. So we are charged with developing sites like Shenton Park, which was an old hospital, and we'll come to White Gum Valley in a minute, which was an old school site. And our role is to work with the local government authorities and with the state government to actually develop those sites for urban infill. We've worked really closely with the communities in both Shenton Park and in White Gum Valley, which is in Fremantle, and we've run comprehensive and extensive engagement processes, so much so that the local government in Fremantle has actually recommended that the framework that we use is set as a benchmark for other developers. So hopefully we are starting to lead the industry in Western Australia. We're actually, we're really keen to improve on that. We do a lot of consultation, but you know, from the experience I've had over the past few days, I think we can really lift our game in regards to building the capacity of the community to be engaged. So where are we now? In 2015, we went back to our stakeholders, and I have to say we got a 92% approval rating from everybody, which is amazing, and it's one of the best our researchers in Western Australia have ever seen. And I would say that we've now actually incorporated all the core values, we've embedded them into our framework and our process and procedures. A lot of our projects are occurring on time and to budget, and we're getting our approvals without too many hiccups. But I think today what we're really learning is that we are in a much more challenging and economic environment, and the political uncertainty for Landcorp is really going to be challenging over the next 6 months as we head to the election. So remaining authentic and really making sure that we're not putting lipstick on a pig and saying we're, you know, just ticking the box is going to be a real challenge for us. And I'd just like to say that over the past few days, I've got some really good golden nuggets from the speakers, and I'm going to be taking them back to Landcorp to continue to challenge our journey in community engagement and making sure that that we're doing it and we're genuine in the way that we do it. So thank you very much for listening.
Good on you, Claire.
Speakers, could you come and join me in the middle of the room here? So come over here. Your time is up. You've done a fabulous job, and I'd like to get you the deserved recognition of a big round of applause, or a whoop, or a shout, or and a photo. Come in together. Come in, squash in together. So 9 inspiring stories. Thank you so much for doing that.